Good evening. President Trump has waded into the general election just hours after Labour launched its campaign with an extraordinary attack on Jeremy Corbyn, breaking all conventions. The US president said Mr Corbyn would be bad for the country and would take the country into such bad places. Meanwhile, he heaped praise on Boris Johnson and called him a fantastic man. He was speaking to the Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage during an interview for LBC. Tonight, Jeremy Corbyn has hit back, accusing the president of trying to interfere in the election. Here's our North America editor, John Sopel.
The US president and Nigel Farage are close.
We made June the 23rd our Independence Day when we smashed the establishment.
The Brexit Party leader has spoken at Trump rallies.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
And today the US president returned the favour and appeared on Mr Farage's radio show. And he waded into the British general election with alacrity, in breach of all normal tradition. His first target was the opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn.
And Corbyn would be so bad for your country. He'd be so bad, he'd take you in such a bad way.
Mr Corbyn tweeted this in response. Donald Trump is trying to interfere in Britain's election to get his friend Boris Johnson elected. It was Trump who said in June the NHS is on the table. And he knows if Labour wins, US corporations won't get their hands on it. Our NHS is not for sale. In the interview, the president also seemed to advocate a Johnson-Farage marriage.
They have great relationships with many of the leaders, including Boris. He's a fantastic man, and I think he's the exact right guy for the times. And I know that you and him will end up doing something that could be terrific. If you and he get together, it's, you know, unstoppable force.
3.5 years ago, Brexiteers were incensed when Barack Obama came to London at David Cameron's request to argue why Britain should vote to remain in the European Union.
Our focus is in negotiating with a big bloc of the European Union to get a trade agreement done. And UK is going to be in the back of the queue.
But that sparked a backlash and may well have been counterproductive. For all the proclaimed closeness between the President and Prime Minister, the real test of US-UK relations will come with the negotiation of a post-Brexit trade deal. And here the President had another little grenade to toss. He warned that the withdrawal agreement negotiated by Mr Johnson and EU leaders might, under certain circumstances, make a trade deal with America impossible. This is a president who takes the view that norms are there to be shattered, and unmistakably this is a direct intervention in the UK election. Unmistakably this is a breach of the norms of behaviour. Now, it's clear who Donald Trump was hoping to help and who he was hoping to harm with this interview. But as Barack Obama found out 3.5 years ago, there can be unintended consequences, and these things can easily backfire. Sophie.
John Sopel, thank you. Well, the UK was supposed to leave the EU tonight. Instead, we're heading into 6 weeks of election campaigning with a new Brexit deadline at the end of January. Jeremy Corbyn launched Labour's campaign this morning and vowed to transform Britain and take on what he called the establishment elite. Our political editor, Kuenssberg, reports.
A roar of welcome for their hero, whose second time round reckons he has a chance to be a champion, not just the challenger. In this election taking place because we have not yet left the EU.
Today is the 31st of October, the day that Boris Johnson promised we would leave the EU. But he has failed, and that failure is his alone.
If they won, Labour would hold another referendum and maybe leave, maybe stay. So they want to campaign on more familiar ground.
Despite his denials, the NHS is up for grabs by US corporations in a one-sided Trump trade sellout. It's not for sale.
The Tories are adamant they do not have plans to trade away the health service. That won't stop this, though. The Labour leader knows he might be onto something. Manna from heaven in a room like this.
Your pitch to the public today is very similar to in 2017. Why do you think 2 years on, you might secure a majority with the same message?
We've had 2 years of this government. We've had now 3 Tory Prime Ministers since I became leader of the Labour Party. We're very well prepared for this election campaign and going to go out there and do it.
Jeremy Corbyn, the campaigner, is back. But it's not about the energy of the home crowd. It's whether Labour can translate this momentum right around the country.
I've already been out campaigning and it's really positive on the doorstep. If we're going to have a chance, it's got to be now.
Just staff made that? Yes. I don't believe it.
Just in case you were wondering what Boris Johnson wants to talk about, he spent the Halloween he hadn't hoped for in class in Suffolk. Then trumpeting the government's plans for building new hospitals in Cambridge.
That's it, I definitely squirted some in there.
Having to explain why he's asking us to go to the polls at all.
This Parliament is just not going to vote Brexit through. And so the only thing we can really do now is go to our people, go to the country and say, come on, let's get this thing done. We've got an oven-ready deal, put it in the microwave.
The Lib Dems tried to take their Stop Brexit message round Parliament Square. Protesters were more concerned about stopping them.
We want a bright future for this country. And in order to do that, we have to stop Brexit. And with the remaining bonus we get, invest in our public services and have an economy that is growing.
This is an election where you can't say they're all the same. The result could mark a dramatic junction for the country.
The Westminster system is broken. Yes. And that's why the people of Scotland need the choice of independence.
Halloween's obviously very big here.
Yeah.
The parties are all somewhat spooked, with good reason. The doorstep might look familiar, but this is an uncertain time, an uncertain campaign, and a very uncertain result. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC News, Westminster.
So Jeremy Corbyn says Labour will put forward what he called a radical and exciting plan for real change. Our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, looks at what Labour's key campaign pledges could mean for you.
What does it mean for me at work?
Jeremy Corbyn's offered real change, and his plans for rights and rewards for people at work certainly offer that. Take pay. Under Labour, over time, they'd be negotiated centrally, sector by sector, nationwide. That's a much bigger role for trade unions, which would be recognised by law. But some say some companies can't afford to pay as much as others. You'd risk pricing people out of work. On staff ownership, more people would own a stake in their company under Labour. 10% of shares in companies with more than 250 staff. Would that deter investment, maybe put bosses off growing their workforce? Or, if you owned a stake in your company, would you work harder, maybe push up profits? Other big changes, a 32-hour working week over 10 years. Sceptics say cut working hours and people end up being paid less.
Are Labour going to renationalise everything?
A Corbyn government would renationalise, that means the state owns it, on a huge scale. Mail, rail, water, energy, there hasn't been a Labour plan so far-reaching and radical in nearly 40 years. Critics, like the CBI, say the cost would be eye-watering, nearly £200 billion. Labour says that's over the top, fanciful, and anyway, the profits could go towards paying off interest on the money borrowed to buy the assets.
What about schools and hospitals?
We're still waiting for detailed costings, but more cash for schools and hospitals is on offer. The party's in something of a bidding war with Boris Johnson, who's making rival promises to end austerity and invest in our services.
What do Labour mean by for the many, not the few?
Jeremy Corbyn wants to build what he calls a fairer country, with higher taxes on corporations, the rich and the better off. Labour would target those he calls dodgy landlords, greedy bosses and polluters. It's a long list. He's promising stronger rights for tenants and for workers. The big argument's about whether higher taxes punish success. Labour says it's about fairness, more from those who can afford it. And anyway, most people won't have to pay any more. In this election, so much could come down to the question, who do voters trust? Boris Johnson's personal ratings in the polls are low compared to past leaders. But just now, Jeremy Corbyn's are far worse. Worse than any Labour leader in decades. Now that can change. whether it does could have a big influence on the outcome of what will be the most unpredictable general election we've seen.
John Pienaar there. Well, let's talk to our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg in Westminster. This intervention by President Trump, what does Labour make of it tonight?
Well, Sophie, it sounds terrible for Jeremy Corbyn, doesn't it? Such a strong attack from the man who's supposed to be the leader of the Western world. But politics is these days so often upside down. Think about this for a second. Is the Labour Party in 2019 going after voters who think that Donald Trump is some kind of hero? Or is the Labour Party actually trying to appeal to people listening and watching at home tonight who think that Donald Trump is a character of many flaws, who frankly would be better off keeping his nose out of British politics? Now, the answer to that is basically that the Labour Party is actually pretty pleased with the fact that Donald Trump has put himself on the opposite side to them. And I think the comments today from the US president in the West Wing are more likely to cause nerves in Downing Street than they are in Labour Party HQ.
And already plenty of signs that this election is going to be unpredictable, uncertain, as you were saying. And tonight, news of another defection to the Liberal Democrats.
That's right. In the last couple of minutes, another former Conservative MP, Antoinette Sandbach, an MP for Edinburgh and Cheshire, has announced that she is joining the Liberal Democrats. Now, she's an MP who'd already gone out of the Tory party over Brexit. But for the Lib Dems, who really fancy themselves as making a big impact in this campaign, it takes their total of existing MPs up to 20, and it gives them another bounce, another reason to feel cheerful. And that sense of alchemy on the campaign trail, that sense of bounce and momentum, is the kind of thing that can make a difference. So the Liberal Democrats are starting off this campaign thinking there's a big opportunity out there for them. Of course, we'll have to see in 6 weeks if they think they've really been able to make the most of it or whether there are too many obstacles in their way.
Our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, thank you. Well, the latest Brexit delay means that businesses are once again having to readjust their preparations and contingency planning for leaving the European Union. Our business editor, Simon Jack, looks at how companies are dealing with another delay to the Brexit deadline.
The Isle of Portland in Dorset, for centuries home of the famous Portland stone. Underground, there is deep frustration that having heeded government calls to prepare for Brexit, another date has gone trundling by. Politics is making business at the Rockface very difficult.
Through the Brexit process, we had to guess which parts we think were going to go wrong.
Michael Poultney stockpiled months' worth of machine parts from Italy and Sweden twice.
We had to stockpile in March. We felt like they couldn't possibly go for a no deal in October again, but as it got closer to the date, we got frightened. I got really concerned. We then had to stockpile again, and that was cost us, each time was costing us £150,000.
Sales have fallen 20% this year as Brexit deadlines weighed heavily on his customers' confidence. In Ludlow, workers at this luxury bike maker can barely move for the stock they've piled up ahead of the deadline.
We've got just over double at the moment, but it's not all in here yet.
Well, there's more to come.
Yeah, there's more to come over the next few days. It's in the UK.
It's not just the cash they spent on stock, it's the time and effort spent preparing for the unknown.
We're not international economists, and we're experts on bicycles, trying to keep listening to the news and work out what's going on and what it means for us. To have been doing that for well over 3 years now, it's just exhausting, yeah.
It's hard to think of a time in living memory when business has been so buffeted by politics. They've been told to stockpile, to prepare, to brace themselves for a deadline at the end of March, then a deadline at the end of October. There's a new deadline in January next year. And now into the mix we throw a general election, where businesses wearily pray that they will get some kind of clarity after 3.5 years of running their businesses on ever-shifting political sands. We won't just be picking out Christmas presents this December, but will a new government deliver the certainty everyone wants?
Well, I don't think the election is going to provide the clarity we're looking for. I think in this situation, it's going to be ongoing for years and years.
It's about time that we were consulted, that the British people were consulted on what needs to happen.
I think it's probably a good thing if it does give us some form of closure on the situation. However, personally, I probably think a second referendum might have been a better choice.
In Ludlow and in Dorset, the Brexit period has seemed an eternity. Both businesses are grateful we are not headed over a cliff edge tomorrow, but both frustrated that once again the Brexit earth has failed to move as promised. Simon Jack, BBC News.
More than 50 MPs will be standing down at the election. That's not unusual. What is, though, is some of the reasons being given for deciding to go. Some of the 18 women who will be leaving Westminster say a growing level of abuse and bullying directed at them and their families, both in person and online, has been a factor in their decision. Here's our special correspondent, Lucy Manning.
So who would want to be an MP? Westminster today, and a ministerial car gets this reception. The abuse and aggression causing some female MPs to stand down is all too visible. 2 MPs read messages they'd received.
Die, you stupid and stay off TV. Your face makes me want to vomit.
Betraying your constituents makes you an enemy of the people. It's a damn pity traitors don't get hung anymore.
Culture Secretary Nicky Morgan is going. Abuse and the impact on her family a factor.
I've had to have a number of people prosecuted for death threats and that sort of thing. And actually, funny enough, an email received recently in my office, which a couple of years ago I think we would have reported to the police. We all sort of agreed, oh well, that's not as offensive as others we get. And so that's, but it has become definitely. And every day you open the email system up, and there's more abusive emails.
Anna Soubry is hoping to stay on, but the job has left her in tears.
This is a form of terrorism. It's winning. We wouldn't accept it in any other sphere. But because we're deemed to be Ramonas, mutineers, traitors, all these awful words that are used, it's kind of like we deserve it.
So far, 18 women are standing down. Although more male MPs are leaving, the female ones are younger and haven't been in the Commons as long.
There's been an enormous increase in abusive tweets sent to MPs. Figures shared with the BBC show that in January, MPs were receiving 32,000 abusive tweets. And by September, that had increased and MPs received 87,000 abusive tweets. In the last 9 months, in total, MPs were on the receiving end of 500,000 tweets containing abuse.
Male MPs also get abuse. Luke Pollard's refusing to quit because of it.
There has been a homophobic flavour to some of the abuse that I've been getting, and the vandalism of my office twice in 1 week, including homophobic slurs, is the latest.
Surrender act! Betrayal!
The Prime Minister's been criticised for his language and a lack of understanding.
I have to say, Mr Speaker, I've never heard such humbug in all my life.
Today he said the abuse was deplorable.
We should have zero tolerance for that kind of behaviour, and we should defend and protect public servants, whoever they are, whether they're politicians or not.
This Parliament is ending, with some feeling they've been driven out. Lucy Manning, BBC News.